Seasons. You might think that summer happens when Earth is closest to the sun. However, seasonal change do not depend on Earth's distance from the sun. In fact, Earth is closest to the sun in January. The tilt on Earth's rotation axis of Earth's motion around the sun causes the seasons to change. Spring and summer in the northern hemisphere. During one half of Earth's orbit, the north end of the rotation axis is toward the sun. Then the northern hemisphere receives more energy from the sun than the southern hemisphere does. See the figure on the right on the next page. Temperatures are higher in the northern hemisphere and lower in the southern hemisphere. Daylight hours last longer in the northern hemisphere. Nights last longer in the southern hemisphere. It is spring and summer in the northern hemisphere and fall and winter in the southern hemisphere. Fall and winter in the northern hemisphere. During an other half of the Earth's orbit, the north end of the rotation axis is away from the sun. As shown in the left figure on the next page, then the northern hemisphere receives less energy from the sun than the southern hemisphere does. Temperatures are cooler in the northern hemisphere and warmer in the southern hemisphere. It is fall and winter in the northern hemisphere. At the same time, spring and summer occurs in the southern hemisphere. North end of rotation axis points away from the sun. Northern hemisphere receives less energy. Southern hemisphere receives more light. North end of rotation axis points towards the sun. Northern hemisphere receives more sun. The southern hemisphere receives less sun. Solstice, equinox, and the seasonal cycle. As Earth travels around the sun, Earth's rotation axis always points in the same direction in space. But the amount the Earth's rotation axis is toward or away from the sun changes. This causes the early circle of the seasons. There are 4 days each year when the direction of the Earth's axis is very special relative to the sun. A solsticle is a day when the Earth's rotation axis is most toward or away from the sun. An equinox is a day when Earth's rotation axis is leaning along sun's orbit, neither towards or away the sun. March equinox to June solstice. The north end of the rotation axis slowly points more and more towards the sun. As a result, the northern hemisphere slowly receives more solar energy. Spring takes place in the northern hemisphere. June solstice and September equinox, the north end of the rotation axis still points towards the sun, but does so less and less. The northern hemisphere starts to receive less solar energy. This is summer in the northern hemisphere. September equinox and to December solstice. The north end of the rotation axis points more and more away from the sun. The northern hemisphere receives less and less solar energy. Fall takes place in the northern hemisphere. December solstice to March equinox. The north end of the rotation axis is still points away from the sun, but does so less and less. As a result, the northern hemisphere starts to receive more solar energy. This is winter in the northern hemisphere. Earth's seasonal cycle is summarized in the table on the next page. Earth's seasonal cycle. December solstice. The December solstice is on December 21st or 22nd. The north end of Earth's axis is leaning farthest from the sun. The south end is close. The northern hemisphere has its fewest number of daylight and winter begins. The southern hemisphere has the greatest number of daylight hours and summer begins. March equinox. The March equinox is on March 20 or 21. Both ends on Earth's rotation axis at the equal distance from the sun. There are about 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of night everywhere on Earth. Spring begins on the northern hemisphere. Fall begins the southern hemisphere. June solstice. The June solstice is on June 20 or 21. The northern end of Earth's axis is leaning closest towards the sun. South end is farther away. The northern hemisphere has the greatest number of daylight hours and summer begins. The southern hemisphere has the fewest number of daylight hours and winter begins. September equinox. The September equinox is September 22 or 23. Those ends on Earth's rotation axis are equal distance from the sun. There are about 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of night everywhere on Earth. Fall begins in the northern hemisphere. Spring begins in the southern hemisphere, changing in the sun's apparent path across the sky. As the seasons change, the sun's apparent paths across the sky also change. In the northern hemisphere, the sun's path through the sky is highest on the June solstice. Similarly, the sun's path is lowest on the December solstice. Equinox, a day when Earth's rotation axis is leaning along Earth's orbit, neither towards nor away from the sun. Orbit, the path an object follows as it moves around another object. Revolution, the motion of one object around another object. Rotation, a spinning motion. Rotation axis, the line on which an object rotates. Solstice, a day when Earth's rotation axis is most towards away from the sun.